At least tell me what she's like. And if you tell me she's got a great personality, I'll... Yeah, she's a brunette, huh? Sure, sounds all right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, what else? Large, sensuous eyes, huh? No kidding. Huh. Sounds nice. Yeah. Yeah, what else? Well, she's got a figure, doesn't she? Well, yeah, I want to know what she, get down to the stuff there. Well, you're the one who's getting me into this. I want to know. Yeah? Like an 8-ounce bottle of Coke. What the heck does that mean? All the curves in the right places? Wow. No kidding. She sounds fantastic.
So tell me, what does he look like? I mean, tell me what he looks like. Oh, he has a nice smile. You know what that means, Irene? That's all he has. Yeah? He has a mustache, huh? A regular Burt Reynolds. So tell me about his build. You know I like him tall. So what is tall enough? Do I have to wear flats or can I wear heels? Oh, that tall, huh? Well, the last tall man I went out with was so tall he drove up in a shoebox. You remember your brother. Tall, dark, and desperate. Oh. Okay. All right. But all I can say is, if this doesn't work out, we're through.
Yeah, I know. She likes him tall. So I'll walk on the curb.
Oh. Men don't make passes at girls who wear glasses. But, Irene, I wear glasses. I can't see without my glasses.
What did you have to tell her about the mustache for? Yeah, no, I shaved it off the other day.
Shouldn't I tell him I sing opera? What's wrong with that?
Larry doesn't date a lot. School and work and his classical records keep him busy. Betty doesn't date a lot either. She's also busy with classes and work and music. But Betty and Larry both feel that if you're going on a blind date to oblige a friend, you might as well play the part the friend described. It's not easy, but Larry finally gets his mustache and hair together and sets out to meet this gorgeous girl. And Betty's at last ready to greet the gorgeous hunk of man she expects. And he's ready to meet the girl he expects.
Hi. Betty?
Yeah, you must be Larry.
Larry, yeah.
Won't you come in?
Yeah.
Well, no matter what their good friends expected, these two young people aren't really attracted to each other. Most of us have probably had blind dates and can smile in sympathy. But humorous as any remembered incident may be, this matter of interpersonal attraction is serious, because attraction between two people is basic to human existence. Attraction, in fact, is basic to life. It's attraction that draws us together for that essential act of mating. Moths must attract other moths, and ants must attract other ants. And like all essential tasks, attraction must depend on trustworthy devices. With insects, this is a simple matter of the right odors and movements. But in higher animals, attraction depends on a complex combination of feelings, movements, timing, odors, and learning. Even a prairie grouse must master the steps of love before a lady will accept him. Among people, attraction is more complicated still, and it affects far more than just mating. Attraction is the glue of society, for ultimately it draws us together in social groups. So, how does it work? Why do you like one stranger but detest another? Those are the critical questions. Interpersonal attraction begins with the process of perception. The person you see when you look at a human being is actually an image which your mind has assembled from many sensory impressions, complete with moral and emotional assessments.
There's a young woman, she's touching her hair. She's very attractive. She'd be a good taxi trip, but I know she's only crossing the street. You've got to see someone with the hand directly above the head. Then you know that they're responsible. They're going to be mature about it, and they know they're getting into a taxi.
One of our perceptual assumptions is that everyone has intentions. Intentions are what motivate us to action. Some, like flagging down a cab, are obvious. But others are hidden from our senses, and trying to grasp these secret motivations is a major goal of our daily human interactions. Another assumption is that everyone is pretty much like us. We assume they have the same tastes and the same goals that we do. And we assume that under the same circumstances, they do the same things we would. They react to us and adjust their behavior to accommodate ours. Once you've formed your impression of someone, it tends to last a long time, perhaps permanently. And even though they may then do things you wouldn't expect of them, you will continue to embrace your original perceptions. How does a perception arise? Well, it begins with what we call the first impression. In our culture, we meet someone new. Eyes dart and peer, anxiously probing for those essential clues to the stranger's character. A first encounter can make an impression lasting far longer than its actual value may warrant. Your own attitude toward yourself and others also affects your perceptions of people. To a gang leader, you or I may be just a tempting mark. Attitudes have three dimensions. First, there's the way you feel about something. Next, the way you think about it. And finally, the way you actually behave toward it. And attitudes don't change easily. If you resent authority today, you'll probably resent it months or years from now. If you act defiantly as a matter of course, you create a general impression in your social circles, and this general view is called a reputation. Reputations run before you. People begin to form their perceptions from what they've heard, and then they expect you to be a certain way. Stereotypes affect our perceptions too. They infiltrate our thinking and lead to advertising and propaganda.
When they divide up the pie in Washington, do you ever wonder who gets the biggest slice?
A stereotype is a reputation we might get from a group we belong to. For example, all school teachers are supposedly prim and proper. All military men, authoritarian. Naturally, when you meet someone, what they say is important to how you perceive them. But their posture and gestures, their body language, is critically important too. A touch can say more than 100 words. And your eyes? Well, it's said that the eyes are the windows to the soul. Finally, we have standards of behavior which we expect people to observe. They are called cultural expectations, and they strongly influence our perceptions of people. We expect and prefer grandparents, for instance, to be kindly and giving. Ultimately, your mind uses its first impressions, attitudes, stereotypes, cultural expectations, and so on, to form an overall impression of a person. You find yourself repelled, unaffected, or attracted. Say you're attracted. That means your mind has reviewed your perceptions and judged them according to the standards of friendship and affection. There are a number of attraction factors, but the most important seem to include similarity. A friend usually holds the same basic values, attitudes, beliefs, and interests as you. People, however, are not content to simply interact with others and to watch their actions. People want to know why others do things they do. If you know why they act as they do, it gives you a better prediction of what they'll do and when they'll do it. If someone does something you don't expect, you call it a surprise. In fact, the very nature of surprise depends on these unconscious predictions or expectations. But how do you explain your own behavior? Psychologists call it attribution theory, the study of how people explain their actions and those of others. They attribute behavior to two basic factors. One is external circumstance. When a bull charges, for instance, you run. You haven't much choice in the matter. The circumstances drive you, and no one would deny that avoidance of danger is your basic motivation. Another factor in attributing motives is a person's character. We assume that people have basic traits, which may be virtues or vices, but which, unlike makeup, are an unchanging and unchangeable part of their personalities. That's how we often see others. But we don't always see ourselves as others see us. We want to think well of ourselves, and consequently, when we explain our own behavior, we tend to blame some external, uncontrollable circumstances. Yet we have no qualms in blaming the actions of others on flaws in their basic character. It seems to be a basic human trait to judge harshly, undervaluing the weight of circumstances and overvaluing the weight of negative traits. So the process of attribution is rather prone to human bias. One girl is late meeting another. They argue.
Forget it. I know you're always late.
Couldn't help it. I got lost on the train. I'm really sorry.
That's the way you are. You're always late.
Students of attribution feel that observers and the ones observed can arrive at such different conclusions because they have access to different information. Observers see only the actor's behavior, but those who do the acting have access to the inner motives, feelings, thoughts, expectations. Another error in the attribution process is stubbornness. We tend to retain our preconceptions, even in the face of hard evidence to the contrary. Racial stereotypes are a case in point. For years, American blacks have struggled to live down their folklore images, becoming doctors, scientists, writers, the soldiers of enlightenment. But only gradually do the preconceptions change, fading into history like the images on old black and white films. It seems that we see what we want to see, not necessarily what is. There's another characteristic of the attribution process. If you like a person or his stereotype, you attribute his success to innate ability and good character, his failures to bad luck. But if you dislike a person, you attribute his successes to random chance or even to cheating, and his failures to innate bad character. It's a tough rap to beat. On the other hand, Attribution theory has helped many an innocent beat a bad rap. No longer, for instance, do we condemn or even accuse a person of witchcraft, much less the intentions of witchcraft. But imagine what justice was like in Puritan times, perhaps at the Salem witchcraft trials. Law did not consider the motives of the witness or the motives of the accused. Guilt was laid entirely to one's actions. But as we've learned to consider a person's intentions, we've turned to more civilized justice and gentler punishment.
Bridget Bishop, you are clearly guilty. Clear for all who have eyes to bear witness. On a day this court will name, you will be hanged by your neck until you are dead. Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live. May Almighty God have mercy on your soul.
The study of attribution, however, has some serious shortcomings. For one, it's imprecise and can never be made perfect because you can't measure or weigh an attribution. You can only deduce it by observing one's behavior. And attribution cannot explain all human behaviors, as some theorists may claim, because attribution is a social process. It exists only in our dealings with other people, even on a blind date. How did this couple explain their boredom? They avoided the subjects of her singing and his records for fear of creating an unfavorable impression.
Yeah, you really know how to pick them, huh?
It was the most grotesque experience of my life.
Well, we just didn't have anything in common. No, we hardly said 2 words to each other all night. Oh, yeah, she was a great blind date. You couldn't even see where she was going.
All we did all night was pick the guy's mustache out of the wonton soup.
Yeah, well, the next time you got one, call Stevie Wonder, huh?
I am never again going to go on a blind date. Ever.
Okay, thanks for trying.
But a funny thing happened a few days later. Larry cut through the park after buying some classical records. He happened across Betty. Betty as she really was. Betty noticed his records, the music he really enjoyed. A funny thing, it turned out that they had a lot more in common than they could admit in the false roles of a blind date. And yet, if you think about it, all the principles of perception, of attitudes, reputations, stereotypes, similarity, it's amazing that 2 people can ever be attracted to each other at all. But they are. And once people come together, they fall into roles. Attraction pulls us together in groups. But for a group to work as a special unit, it must divide into roles. To understand the true nature of roles, we look again to the world of insects. For there, roles are free of intellectual and emotional complications. We can see what the function of a role really is. To an ant, for example, a role is simply a life of instinctive motions. But the motions intermesh with the motions of other ants. We call it cooperation. Obviously, then, cooperation and roles are opposite sides of the same process. But now we can see more clearly that society is built not of bricks and mortar, but of attraction and roles. And human roles have biological, psychological, and social components. We humans are bound by our roles. They're inescapable. But we differ from ants in our tremendous talent for learning. An ant falls into a single role, or social caste. Each of us can learn any number of different roles. Worker, lawyer, clerk, the list is endless. Just what, though, is this term known as role? Can it be defined or described? An experiment by Philip Zimbardo at Stanford University demonstrates the power of social roles. Briefly put, Dr. Zimbardo simulated a prison, with some students living by the restrictions and rules of prisoners, and others enjoying the rank and privileges of prison guards. In this simulation, all the prisoners share certain characteristics. They've committed a crime. They wear the same uniform. People in the position of prisoners also share certain behaviors. They act in the regimented way that all prisoners must act. The prison guards also share certain characteristic attitudes and behaviors. Prison guards may treat prisoners contemptuously. Their role gives them the privilege and the power. So social position includes characteristics, behaviors, and attitudes from the world that are shared with others in the same situation. The most important finding of the Zimbardo experiment is that the subjects, both prisoners and guards, simply became the roles that they played. When you consider society at large, the concept of role emerges in true perspective. Because of your social position, people expect certain things of you, and you learn how to respond. So the ability to learn our roles separates us from the socialism of insects. But one of the most powerful ways we learn is by observation. In this famous experiment by Bandura and Walters, young children watched this adult teacher, called a role model, attack a Bobo doll. Later, when individual children were left alone with the doll, a number of them tried to pulverize the hapless dolls. They seemed, simply by watching, to have learned a new violent activity. This probably means that we learn a good portion of our roles in life by observing others. But suppose life cast you in a part which doesn't satisfy you. Perhaps your abilities and your expectations far exceed the simple ant-like role that tradition expects you to play. Well, psychologists call this role conflict. Probably everybody has experienced it, but the most publicized example today is the women's movement. No more of this being cheated by life, say the ladies. We're not ants, we're human beings, and we can learn new roles as well as any man. And they've set out to prove it. But society teaches insidiously, and its lessons permeate all walks of life. This holds true for the ancient values of womanhood as well. Our little girls watch commercials like this, for instance.
The nice Cadbury people use whole hazelnuts.
Yes. Then while you're talking about the blending of the nuts with Cadbury's Dairy Milk Chocolate, lean across and give a piece to Harry.
Hello, Harry.
Fine.
He's just crazy about Cadbury's whole nuts.
Fine. Now, are you ready? Big smile and action.
Cadbury's. Cadbury's what nut?
Yet women have endured. And with the advent of modern contraception, they're prevailing in their battles with tradition. They've showed they can, by putting their minds to it, play most of the roles which life once reserved for men. New roles for women is not enough, however. As the ants so clearly show, roles should also be compatible. If one role changes, others must adjust. But the ultimate goal is that society should survive so that we can all survive. So men must adjust their expectations of women. Women must adjust their expectations of men. And the men of the world, lovable creatures that they are, have proven that they too seem able to cope with a new reality. at least the men who can do their work at home. But we must carefully weigh the value of role theory. Just as animals can be trained to take roles they would never play in their normal environments, humans also may be able to learn experimental roles which would never mesh in life's incredible scheme of social cooperation. The theory of roles is also hampered by a heavy bias toward social interactions. Role theory ignores much of the personality, the emotions, and the intellectual processes of private individual humans. And yet these internal processes, our individual natures, have a great deal to say in how you perform your roles. A case in point is this sweet little sow. She was painstakingly trained to carry her plate to supper. But swine by nature root for their food. So, as time passes, she reverts to pushing her plate to dinner. Pushing is closer to her natural rooting actions. The point is, we really don't know how far we humans can modify our roles in life. Certainly more than creatures of the barnyard, but perhaps not as much as the role theorists think. The study of human roles has taught us a great deal about ourselves, and we need all the knowledge we can get. People are naturally attracted to one another, and they naturally fall into roles. But we also want freedom of choice in what roles we take, and we don't want to be hampered by nature or tradition. So, the study of roles may tell us about the extent of our freedoms.